What keystone should you actually go for when playing Jhin? Footwork or Dark Harvest? Actually, both options are perfectly viable. The only real difference is that Dark Harvest is just way more fun to play, adding to Jhin's already impressive burst damage. Well, maybe I'm a little biased because I just cannot resist the dopamine rush of a Dark Harvest proc, but in this video I will show you how some of the best solo queue players in the world are using Dark Harvest Jhin to his full potential. The optimal rune page for Dark Harvest is Taste of Blood, Eyeball Collection and Treasure Hunter with Presence of Mind and Legend Bloodlines secondary. The item build is pretty much the same as the current meta build, going Galeforce, Collector, Rapid Fire Cannon and Infinity Edge in this exact order in most games. However, some players choose Eclipse for their Mythic instead, and I will explain the pros and cons of this decision over the course of the video. The lane phase with Jhin is all about managing his fourth shot. You want to be looking for trades when you can reliably get it off, and if you do this consistently, Jhin's burst damage allows him to go toe-to-toe with even the strongest lane bullies in all of bot lane. It is important that you actually play aggressively with Jhin at this stage because you want to start collecting Dark Harvest stacks as early as possible for optimal scaling. The trading patterns themselves are quite simple and straightforward, since Jhin's fixed attack speed makes it very intuitive to alternate between using his auto attacks and his W and Q spell for optimal DPS. But by far the strongest aspect of Jhin's early game are the W setups. Jhin is one of the few blessed AD carries with hard CC on a basic spell, which gives him super scary follow-ups on his support's crowd control. But since Jhin's W is so easy to apply, it actually works both ways. Your support can land their crowd control spells for free as well off of Jhin's snare, making your bot lane all-ins very reliable. Setups like these pretty much always result in a kill, and in an opponent's destroyed mental, and all it takes is just one of you to land one spell since the rest is guaranteed. But W is not merely an offensive playmaking tool. It can be used defensively as well, which is especially important when the enemy jungler is trying to gank you. A well-placed W can completely deny the enemy's engage, leaving them unable to leverage their numbers advantage. And as much as Jhin's early game prowess dissuades the enemy jungler from coming, it just as much incentivizes your own jungler to get fed in your lane. The combination of your crowd control with W and early game burst damage with 4th shot Dark Harvest gives even relatively risky plays a surprisingly good success rate. Much like you can use W to follow up on your support, you can use it just as easily to follow up on your allied jungler. Even when Jhin is pushed all the way into his tower, he can still shoot his W from a mile away, making his follow-ups much more consistent compared to those of other marksmen. And after removing the first enemy from the map, cleaning up the other is pretty much always free due to numbers advantage. Your W's massive range also comes in clutch when you're behind, since this spell ensures you'll always be useful anyway. In situations where other marksmen have no choice but to back off, Jhin can still remain in the backline and impact the situation from a safe distance. Another tool in your arsenal that allows you to pressure the opponent from across the map is Jhin's ultimate. The most obvious application is to use it as an execute, finishing off low health enemies. It deals more damage the less HP the enemy has left, and while you can sometimes use it as a kind of weird combo finisher, you are probably better off looking for situations in which you can actually take advantage of its range. Jhin of course deals most damage when he is close enough to auto-attack, and your ultimate is more like a backup plan for when you are forced to retreat. Likewise, when you know the enemy team is full of assassins who threaten to one-shot you as soon as you get too close, you can also use your ultimate at the start of the fight. This way you will have an easier time taking them on afterwards, since they are already on low HP at this point. From here, chances are your burst damage with autos and Dark Harvest will be enough to shut them down. But one important part of Jhin's burst damage we still need to talk about is actually your Mythic item. As mentioned earlier, the most common and arguably most effective pick is the item Galeforce, since Jhin loves both more movement speed and the mobility from its active effect. In addition to that, the damage from Galeforce's dash is not to be underestimated, as it scales with your AD stat and has therefore perfect synergy with Jhin's attack damage boosting passive. The dash makes it almost impossible to out-kite Jhin, as you can use it in between your auto attacks, and its missing health damage also perfectly complements Dark Harvest. The combination of mobility and burst allows you to prevail in situations where you really shouldn't be able to, since you can make such quick work of low health opponents that even fights with numbers disadvantage can suddenly be winnable. But it's not just Galeforce's absurd combat power. Jhin players also value this item because it even further increases Jhin's playmaking potential. The dash massively buffs Jhin's effective range, allowing you to safely stay outside of the enemy's range while still threatening to pull the trigger as soon as they overstep. And especially once you also finish your rapid fire cannon, your circle of influence with Galeforce's dash and your attack range is so big that once you've locked onto your target, there is no chance they could ever hope to get away from you. But again, there are players who say it is worth it to forego all of Galeforce's benefits in favor of Eclipse, and here's why. Eclipse is way better if you need to straight up brawl with your opponent, since mobility doesn't really matter here, and Eclipse's stat profile is just perfect for dueling. Your execute damage with the lethality and armor penetration is much more reliable, since it is not tied to a rather long active cooldown, so in situations where target access is not a factor, Eclipse is definitely the superior choice. The shield in combination with the healing from Omnivamp also means Eclipse outshines Galeforce defensively, since it allows you to survive enemy ambushes in which Galeforce's dash would not be enough to get out of danger. In any case, the Galeforce dash is undeniably very powerful, and missing out on that spell to gap close can make some situations a little bit awkward, which is why most Jhin players prefer Galeforce after all. Galeforce is also definitely more useful for Jhin's general game plan during the mid-game, because at this stage your main task is to look for picks with your W. W is your go-to playmaking button, and it makes everything your teammates might do just much more reliable. At the same time, W is a simple way of punishing enemies who might be out of position, which is especially important in solo queue where usually that team wins who can more effectively take advantage of the opponent's greed. The marksman position has a bad reputation for having low agency and carry potential, but you'd be surprised how much a skilled Jhin player can actually influence the outcome of the game just with W by itself. And as I've said, this is where Galeforce is coming in clutch again. Because even when you W from a mile away, the gap closer and extra burst enables you to reliably follow up with damage yourself if you have to. Being burst damage focused instead of damage over time like more traditional marksmen also makes this a lot more reliable, since the enemy team will have pretty much no time to react. But while some games can be won with good W picks alone, most of them will still be decided by how you navigate teamfights with Jhin. Jhin has this reputation of being a bad teamfighter into tanks, since they would be able to just shrug off his damage, but this is not actually true. The only bit of truth to that is that his ultimate is bad against tanks, but when you fight them with auto attacks and basic spells, you'll be fine. And due to your ultimate's execute damage, even tanks need to be afraid of it once you've chunked them low. In fact, I would argue that Jhin is actually quite good against tanks as long as you follow this principle. Tanks rely on getting close to you so they can disrupt you with their crowd control, but Jhin has so much time in between his auto attacks that he can just run circles around them. More attack speed focused marksmen would really be worse off, since they need to worry about tanks with Thornmail, whereas Jhin is barely affected by it as long as he has Lord Dominic's regards. So yeah, kill the tanks first, then cast your ultimate. Very straightforward sequencing. If you do not follow this rule, however, then sure, you won't accomplish much. Even worse, you'll be a sitting duck since now you are locked in place and cannot even dodge the tank's crowd control anymore. Speaking of which, it is important to always be ready to cancel your ultimate if the enemy commits to punishing you for effectively rooting yourself and revealing your position to them. Yes, the damage against squishies is really strong, especially with Dark Harvest, but cancelling it when the enemy assassins get into flash range can be the difference between winning or losing the fight. The main selling point of Jhin's ultimate is its range after all, so you definitely don't need to worry about your damage, which is just as strong with auto attacks. But if you enjoy playing marksmen who are strong in lane while still scaling surprisingly well into the late game, I also recommend that you add lethal tempo Misfortune to your champion pool. And you can find out how challenger players are optimizing this pick by clicking the link on your screen right there.